be honest, I still haven't figured out a good venue for these Knight Rider series. You know, I have a fireplace, and I've considered, going in front of the fireplace, but it's kind of in the central of my house, and I don't. It's not a good filming location because there's always people there. Because I have a very happy family. So I don't know. I don't know what I'm going to do with these. I'm still working on that. Bear with me. We're trying to figure out a good filming location and a good background and a good color scheme and all that stuff, all the production stuff. And right now, this chair's probably a little squeaky. I think you can hear that. I think the mic's picking that up. So I apologize about that. A lot of apologies today. So I hope you're excited for a cerebral adventure. That's at least what I hope these Knight Rider series is, and that's why I hope that you tune in here, is because we're gonna be a little long-winded. If you're new here for the Knight Rider series, we try to slow down. We try to talk a little bit longer, and I hope that you listen to this or watch this while you're making your breakfast in the morning, or maybe you're on that night shift, and hopefully this is a little entertainment bump for you as you work through your night shift. And I hope that it gives you something to think about and ponder as we go on the journey together. So I recently looked up the rates for PTSD. And I looked them up, and I didn't do extensive amounts of searching, so I'm sure there's a lot more information. But I ended up on some government website, I think it was the VA, and it showed PTSD rates per 100 since World War II. And in World War II, it was like 2 per 100. And in the most recent GWAT, maybe it was Afghanistan, maybe it was Iraq, I can't remember which conflict they referenced. It was something like 19. Okay. 20%, essentially, right? 1 out of 5, essentially, is what you're talking about there. Per 100, right? 1 out of 5 people. 2% versus 20%. That's a tenfold increase, right? Why do you think that is? Now, the theory I always heard growing up was, well, the guys in World War II had time between combat and getting back home, right? They had time, and they were able to talk about those experiences because they're on the boats, right? They took a boat back versus like Vietnam, for instance, right? My uncle was in Vietnam. You probably have relatives who served in Vietnam. And Vietnam, you're in the jungles, and like 24 hours later, you're sitting at home in your living room, right? There's like no adjustment time. You were just running for your life 36 hours ago, right? On the literal other side of the planet, fighting guerrillas, and now all of a sudden you're sitting in your living room, right? It's like that scene from The Hurt Locker, right? Where he's in the desert the whole movie, and then it cuts to the grocery store. He's walking through the grocery store, right? It's a great cut. But it's like that. And the theory goes, and I think there's certainly some validity to this, right? That they had time to decompress and work through those experiences and talk through it with other people, etc., right? I think there's truth to that. I used to work with a guy who was a Marine for like 20-some years, really smart guy. And he had his master's degree, because he got it when he was in the Marine Corps. And it was in something like war psychology or something like that. And I had read On Killing by Lieutenant Colonel Dan Grossman. And he had read On Killing, and he'd also read On Combat, which I read later. Wasn't a big fan of that one. And I remember I was talking to him, and I'm like, well, hey, do you think people got PTSD in ancient combat? Like like 100 BC, like the Romans fighting the Gauls or something, do you think that they experienced PTSD? Or do you think that's a modern phenomenon, right? Because if you don't know, one of the, like, where PTSD started to become a bigger deal was since World War One, right? There's more than one reason we call it the first modern war, right? Machine guns changed infantry tactics forever. There was planes, there were tanks. I mean, like, all these things were being used for the first time, right? And one of the things that started happening was it was called shell shock at the time. But you know, we've come to call it PTSD, right? And because these guys were in the trenches for weeks, just getting hammered with artillery. And when I say hammered with artillery, if you're not familiar with World War One, you should go look into it some more. It's, I think, one of the most fascinating periods in history, one of the most fascinating wars, and like hammered, like day and night, nonstop, 10, 12, 24, 36, 48 hours of continuous shelling, right? And people, of course, just mentally broke, right? Because what else can you do? Imagine just sitting in your bunker for 12 or 24 or 36 hours while super loud shells are just pounding down, and you know that anyone could fall and kill you, right? Like the mental strain is immense, and really hasn't been replicated in modern combat. I know that they're digging some trenches in Ukraine and Russia, but it's still not the same, right? Probably one of the worst places to ever be on the Western Front in World War One. Out of all combat in the last 100 years, that's probably the worst place to be. In my opinion, that's all it is. So anyways, that's when PTSD started. And so the thought was, you know, hey, we've reached such a horrible level of combat that it's causing this PTSD thing. And that's one of the theories out there. And so I said, you know, hey, do you think people experienced that prior? And he said, yeah, of course. I mean, like, imagine having to stab someone to death, right? And being on a battlefield with all the blood and the sweat and the grit and the fighting and the close-in combat and the bad breath distance kind of stuff. And yeah, of course people had PTSD. I'm like, yeah, that's a good argument. You know, Dan Grossman makes the case, and I think correctly, that like the more physical and mental closeness you have with someone else, the more traumatizing the killing is for the killer, right? Like dropping bombs at 30,000 feet doesn't really feel like you're killing anybody, but stabbing someone to death, right? It's very intimate, for lack of a better word, experience. I can understand that. That makes sense in my brain, right? So recently, I read this book called Defenders of the West by Raymond Ibrahim. I'm not sure. I've already filmed the review of the book. It'll be coming out later, so I'm not going to talk about the book. But one of the things that I thought was interesting from this book is he's going through these people in the Middle Ages, right, from about 1000 AD to about 1400 AD. He picks these 8 people, and he talks about their wars against the Muslims. And you know, Richard the Lionheart is in there, who goes on a crusade. Louis the Ninth, Saint Louis the Ninth, Saint Louis the Ninth is in there, who goes on crusades. Some others, Skanderbeg, guy I'd never heard of, called the Albanian Braveheart, awesome character, is in there. El Cid, like some of these characters you may or may not have heard of, right? And like when I think about like El Cid and Richard the Lionheart specifically, these guys are the most quintessential example, but they're far from the only example, okay? But they're the most quintessential example. These guys, and Skanderbeg. Skanderbeg was an Albanian guy who fought the Ottomans, the Turks. Skanderbeg allegedly bodied 3,000 people like himself, like in hand-to-hand combat. I mean, the guy fought for like 20 some years, never lost a battle. I don't know. Let's say it's not 3,000. Okay, let's just say it's 500. I mean, that's still astronomical. Imagine stabbing 500 people to death. Okay, I mean, ludicrous amounts of people. Richard the Lionheart was probably in the triple digits. He campaigned in the Middle East for 2 years, fighting the Muslims there. Crusades were a good thing, by the way. Different topic, different video. But El Cid fought for, I don't know, 10, 20 years in Spain. Long time. Probably at least in the triple digits of people he personally slew, right? So these guys, I mean, fought hard for years. Sorry for the cut there. My son came in the room and needed something. So usually I try to do these in one take. So these guys fought hard for years, okay? For years. And didn't get PTSD as far as I can tell. Now, there's 1, 2, I don't know, different potential answers for that, right? In On Killing by Dan Grossman, he talks about how 2% of the population does not get affected from being in combat. Like true sociopaths, psychopaths, it doesn't bother them. So you could say, well, you know, those are just your 2%, Dylan. Those people are sociopaths, psychopaths, like clinically diagnosed, you know, don't have normal human feelings kind of thing. And so, you know, there you go. Problem solved. I don't think that's true. Based on like writings we have from these people, based on accounts of other people who knew them, who were there. You know, again, these are just some of the most quintessential examples. Like there are more. There are lots more, right? So, and we have lots of documentation about this. And Godfrey, Louis the Ninth. Like, anyways, all to say, you don't get the impression from reading about these people's lives that they were psychopaths or sociopaths or unfeeling, uncaring, indifferent. You don't get that from people who knew them, who were their friends, who were like intimately close to them. There was this story of Richard the Lionheart sent some people out to forage for some food, and they were being attacked, right, by the Turks, because the Turks were constantly trying to harass them and kill them and all that stuff. Or not the Turks, excuse me, just the Muslims. I forget which faction at this time, but were out there trying to kill him. And so Richard heard about it, and he gathered some boys, right? He's going to go rescue his guys who he sent out to forage food. And they get there, and there's just too many. There's just too many Muslims. And they say to Richard, the king, the Lionheart, they say, hey, look, there's nothing we can do. I mean, they're not going to make it. There's way too many of them. It's better that just they die than you die and we all die. Like, this is crazy, right? And Richard has this great line where he says, I sent those men there. And if I don't go do something about it, then may I never be called the king again. And he charges in battle. Pretty awesome. That's a leader, right? That's the guy you want to follow. And you don't say something like that if you're a psychopath, sociopath. If you're just indifferent, right? You don't have a feeling of loyalty and connectedness and like obligation to those people that do what you say and that you're their king and that you serve them as they serve you, right? You don't have that feeling of like deep chivalry and nobility and honor if you're a sociopath, psychopath, right? And we live in an age where everyone is not narcissistic. What's the word I'm looking for here? But has a negative outlook, right? Nihilistic. That's what I'm trying to say. Everyone has a nihilistic outlook in the world. They're not, that's how we interpret most events. Well, if you look back at Julius Caesar and he did such and such a thing because, he was really just trying to make political gains. And, that's how we interpret the past. That's how we assume. We assume all politicians are just in it for the money, which, by the way, I believe about our current state of politicians, right? And everyone's just in it to out for themselves. And so we look back on all human history and we say, therefore, that's how it always was. Right? That's what all politics is. That's what all human history is. People just trying to be out for themselves, to manipulate and scheme and do their godless, sinful work to try to gain for themselves. They don't actually care about anything. They don't actually believe in anything. They don't actually do all the stuff they say. They're just doing it because they want power and money. That's all that matters to these people. Right? I was trying to wait for my tea to cool down enough before I sipped it. And luckily I timed that correctly. So we say that's all they care about. What if that's not true? What if people in past generations actually believed the things that they said? Now, I know that's kind of ironically, weirdly, that's kind of a wild statement to make these days, right? Because we assume that anybody in political leadership or national leadership absolutely 100% does not believe what they say. They just make noises with their mouths in order to convince you that they think that, so that you do what they want, right? That's how we look at politics, right? And I believe that about a lot of our politicians. So it's hard to imagine leaders of the past actually believing what they say. But I'm saying, what if that's the case? Because I'm telling you, when you read these accounts of these old men, not that they were old, but that they occurred a long time in the past, right? Of the things that they say and the things that they do, I think they believe what they say. Richard the Lionheart crusaded in Jerusalem for 2 years and gained absolutely nothing. In fact, he almost lost his kingdom over it. St. Louis IX crusaded. His first crusade was a disaster. He spent months, I don't know, I wasn't quite clear on this, a long time in prison where they threatened to kill him. All of his men were enslaved. He got out of prison. He spent years trying to buy back all his guys from slavery. Got home, lived in France for 20 some years. And then towards the end of his life decided he wanted to try to go crusade again. That's not someone who does that for personal gain. Right? Like, you look at the accounts of these people who sacrifice personally, nationally, right? Like when you're a king and you're gathering all this money to go fight this crusade on, hundreds of miles away. And that's not for gain. It's not. They didn't gain anything. In fact, a lot of them, almost all of them, lost everything. So what if they believe what they say? What if they actually believe in something greater than themselves? Right? You should believe in Jesus. That's a side note. Shouldn't be a side note. Should always be the main note. But in this case, for this video, side note, you should believe in Jesus. He's greater than you. And you need to have something, Jesus, in your life that gives you ballast and a calling and a will and calls you up into something, right? If you're just being calculating narcissist nihilist, there are no great men of history that are like that I can think of. I guess maybe the first example you could argue is maybe Hitler, but I think Hitler was psychotic and genuinely believed what he said, right? He genuinely believed in the goodness of Germany, and all these things. And I'm not a pro-Hitler guy, very anti-Hitler guy here. Just saying, I think that he believed what he said, right? I don't think that he was necessarily calculating and really just in it for the power and the whatever. I think he believed what he said. I think he believed these people are so evil they're going to destroy our culture. We have to eradicate them. That's the only solution. We have to press into Russia and destroy them so that we can have Lebensraum, right? We can have living room for all the German peoples. I think he believed that. So, what if these people, great men, evil men of history, believed what they said? And I think that's the case. I think that we live in a unique time in history where everything's viewed through a nihilism lens, right? And this lens of no hope, no purpose, no higher calling. Everyone's just out for themselves all the time. But I think that there's something to the believing. And I think that one, when you look back at history and you realize, oh, these people actually believed that. They actually sacrificed for that. They gave their lives to that. They believed in this greater calling of life. It's inspiring. It's inspiring. Two, I think, I don't know, I don't think they had PTSD. Right? Why not? Oh, because I think they believed in what they were doing. We live in a time where, since World War II, I would argue, war has been a mechanical, impersonal, not nationalistic thing, right? America pretty much has always been at war since World War II. For the last, 80 years? Pretty much the whole time. Maybe there was a few breaks here and there. But we've always been sending soldiers pretty much since World War II to fight somewhere. I mean, right after World War II, a couple years later, you have Korea, you know. Couple years after that, you have Vietnam, right? Those are major conflicts. Those are major wars. Then you have all kinds of little wars all the time, right? You have the invasion of Panama in the 90s, or the Grenada in the 80s, right? You have all these little conflicts all the time. We went into Iraq twice. We went into Afghanistan. Like, you have all these different things that we've done. I remember it was a couple years ago, some special operator guy died in Africa. And I was like, what? I'm sorry, what? We have soldiers in Africa? Like, I was pretty ignorant, right? I'm like, why do we have soldiers in Africa? What are we doing in Africa? I didn't even know we had, I didn't even know there was a thing, right? You had the Benghazi conflict thing in Libya, right? They made a movie, 13 Hours. It's fun little Michael Bay flick. It's a flick that Michael Bay was made to make. It's just been this mechanical war. It's been this business of war. And I mean that both from the dollar sense, whole different video, right? And from just like how we've conducted war. Impersonal, causeless. It's been causeless war. And yeah, we try to say stuff about the causes and, Operation Iraqi Freedom. And, I bought into Iraq the first time, to my shame, right? I think I was 16, 17 at the time. And I'm like, yeah, that's a great idea. We should do that. Bad call that. And we buy into these wars that, they talk about the moral purpose, right? But we're all kind of over that at this point. We all kind of realize, yeah, that was all a lie. Even at the time, it wasn't super weighty. And so there's no calling or purpose or there's not even a nationalism, right? You look at World War I, before people step into World War I, nationalism in all the countries, Germany and France and England, I mean, it's through the roof. Russia, Russia, who's on the verge of having their revolution in just a couple of years, right? The Austro-Hungarian Empire that doesn't survive the war. The Ottoman Empire that doesn't survive the war. All these places that are in their death throes, nationalism is through the roof. Through the roof. Right? Because people believed. They believed in what they were doing. And I think that when you go back into these times where people believe in what they're doing, I think that has something to do with the psychology of war. And that has something to do with the psychology of how you, as the individual grunt, approach it or deal with it or mentally and emotionally process it. Right? That's going to affect it. And if you believe, okay, I'm making these hypotheticals up here, so stick with me, okay? But if you're a Minuteman in the American Revolution and, you're fighting your war and it's the worst thing you've ever experienced and there's cannons going off and there's volley fires and people are dying and screaming and bleeding and it's horrible, but you think to yourself, this is terrifying, this is horrible, but I remember why I'm here. I'm here because America is for Americans and we will forge this nation and we will not be oppressed by these people. And so I will do what I need to do because I believe in the calling of why I'm here. Okay? Or, option B, completely hypothetical, I'm just making these up. Johnny, who is 19 and a half years old, who finds himself drafted to serve in Vietnam, and now it is 2 a.m., and the trees are talking, and things are spooky, and that bush keeps getting closer, and someone's screaming over here, and there was a gunshot over there, and it sounds like someone's getting stabbed over here, and what's going on? I didn't sign up for this, and now mortar fire is incoming, and oh God, why am I here? Why am I here? Right? That's the question that people start to ask. What am I doing here? This is preposterous. I don't want to be here. I don't want to die here. Right? I have so much to live for, etc., etc. Well, which one of those people do you think processes that conflict better after the fact? You know what I'm saying? Like, again, I don't know, but I would be willing to bet the PTSD rates among, like, special forces guys are lower than the PTSD rates among, like, average grunt guys. And you could say, oh, Dylan, that's because they're better trained. That's because, they have more training. I don't know what else you're going to say. I would say, well, they go on more dangerous missions. That's kind of the point. It's kind of what they're signing up for. So that should kind of balance out, right? So why do they have lower rates? Again, don't know. Someone fact check me on that, but I'm betting they do. And I would say, well, it's because they believe in what they're doing, right? They've sacrificed quite a bit to be there. You know what the divorce rate is among Navy SEALs? It's like in the 90-some percentile. 90-some% of Navy SEALs get divorced. Why? Well, because they're married to the job. Because you're on training rotations for 6, 8, 12 months of the year. And then you're fighting the rest of the time. Like actual combat, right? So, they believe in what they're doing. They believe in what they're doing. So, what does that mean for you? You're just an everyday guy, probably, if you're watching this. You're like me. What does it mean? Well, I think that it means that as an American Minuteman person guy, you need to believe in what you're doing. I mean, I don't know if Red Dawn or whatever will ever happen. I don't know if, that whole thing will play out or whatever. But what I do know is that, like, I believe in what I'm doing, right? Like, I believe in my boys. I believe in the ideas of liberty for my posterity. I believe in a higher calling of something that matters more than me. And matters more than my friends. And matters more than you. And I like you, don't get me wrong. But I think that there's something beyond all of us, right? And if things get uncomfortable, and someone decides to invade American soil, like Canada, maybe Greenland, that's a joke for the current times. I don't know. We'll deal with that, right? But I believe in it, and I think that's my point, right? Like I believe in it, and you need to. Do you believe in what you're doing? I mean, that's a question. I think you should ask yourself that, right? Am I just like playing guns, or like, do I believe in this stuff? Do I have this ballast that carries me through that I realize is worth more? I had saw a relative over Thanksgiving. I think it was Thanksgiving. Yeah, over Thanksgiving time. And was talking to them about life, this, that, and everything. And they have a small business that they own in this small town. And I was asking them, well, would you, if COVID happened again, would you, and you had to shut down your business, like, how would you deal with that? And he was like, well, I don't know, like I said, I have to shut down. I'm like, really? Like, you'd do that? And he's like, yeah, I think so. I'm like, well, what if they said you couldn't go to church? Would you do that? And he's like, no, I'd probably still go to church. And I said, okay, well, what if, like, they said if they caught you at church, they're going to close down your business? What would you do then? He's like, well, I probably wouldn't go to church then. And I'm like, man. So I think I said something like, so you just want to, like, count your shekels, right? Like, you don't like have anything you're willing to, like, lay it on the line for. And he was real cool about it. He's like, yeah, no, I don't really think so. No, like, yeah, I just kind of want to do my business thing. And I just thought, man, what an empty life. Like, I can't, if you don't have something that you're willing to sell it all down the line for, I don't know what you're living for, man. I don't know. Those are the kinds of people that get PTSD. Again, I don't know anybody with PTSD. I've never had it. You could tell me I'm an ignorant slut, and we can talk about that. That's totally fine. But I'm just saying, like, if you don't have anything worth selling it all for, I feel bad for you. I don't think that you have anything worth living for. If there's nothing you're willing to die for, what are you living for? I mean, I think it's that simple. So, point of this video, thing I hope you ponder here on this wonderful episode of Knight Rider, thank you for coming with us, is what do you believe in? Right? And I mean that in the big picture sense, right? What are you believing in? Are you just an NPC being led from one thing to the other? Because we have lots of NPCs in the gun world, guys. We're not all independent thinkers, I can assure you. Or are you saying, no, like, there's stuff that matters. There's stuff that matters more than me, more than my wife, more than my kids, more than anything. There's stuff that matters. And I'm willing to sell it all down the line for that. Because I believe in it. I think we gotta have that. And I think if we don't have that, that's an empty life. Think about it. Do brave deeds. And enjoy.